It's 1991, and people are flocking to arcades around the country to play the new game, Street Fighter 2. As people mash the buttons and spin the stick, a lone fireball is shot out. This is the story of how the Hadouken shaped the competitive scene. The fireball, or Hadouken, is a staple across the Street Fighter series. Over the years, it has taken many shapes and sizes, but the core concept remains. You do a series of inputs with a controller, and your character will shoot a chunk of plasma out that will move across the screen and damage the opponent if they touch it. To show how it has been used in the competitive scene over the years, we have to go all the way back to Street Fighter 2 and explain how fireballs work. In the early days of Street Fighter, there were two main styles of fireballs. Motion-based fireballs, where you would do a motion with the arcade stick, normally a quarter circle forward motion, going from down forward to forward, and then pressing a punch button. This was used by characters like Ryu, Ken, Dalsum, and Sagat. Charge fireballs, on the other hand, were where you would hold back on the arcade stick for a certain amount of time, and then press forward and punch to throw a fireball. This was used by characters like Guile and Chun-Li. To add variety to the characters, each fireball acted differently. The main differences, though, were how fast the fireballs moved, and how fast you could recover before you could move again. To fully understand recovery after a fireball, we have to talk about frames. Frames are counted as each frame of animation a move has. Think of an old stop action movie, where they take a picture and then move character a little bit and then take a picture again. Every character has a different number of animation frames for every attack, and when you do an attack, you have to go through a certain amount of frames before you can move again. We can show how important these are with Ryu and Guile. For example, Ryu takes a total of 52 frames of animation to shoot and recover from his fireball, but Guile only takes 21 frames of animation to shoot a sonic boom and recover. You would think that Guile would be able to just fill the screen with sonic booms and always win, but two mechanics stop this. First, in most Street Fighters, the game only allows you to have one fireball on screen at a time. This makes it so you can't fill the screen with an infinite barrage of fireballs. Second, since he's a charge character, he has to hold back for 60 frames. This makes his fireball technically 81 frames if both players are standing still. Guile players can get around this though by holding the charge during the animation of the sonic boom. This means if you're perfect, you can throw sonic booms out much faster. Armed with this knowledge, players started to craft strategies around fireballs. One of the first strategies that existed is the one that is still used to this day, simply shooting fireballs. As your opponent attempts to jump over them, you hit them with an uppercut. It's an incredibly strong strategy, especially against characters that don't have a fireball. One of the classic examples of this is Ryu vs Zangief. Since the Zangief has no way to do damage from far away, he is forced to enter the maze of fireballs and attempt to get an opening, allowing players to predict these jumps and punish them. But what about if the other player has a fireball? That's where the true legends of the game are able to separate themselves. Players like John Choi are known for their immense knowledge in the fireball game. They will move in between fireballs, with buttons to pretend to fireball, and force their opponents to second guess when they want to throw a fireball themselves. This allows them to slowly gain small advantages over time until they can start to overwhelm their opponent. As Street Fighter 2 evolved, more versions came out, eventually adding in the boss character Sagat. This was Capcom's first foray into expanding what a fireball was. Instead of having one fireball, Sagat had two different fireballs with two different properties. You would have a high fireball and a low fireball. The high fireball was able to be ducked and it wouldn't hit you. And the low fireball was so low that you could change when and how you jumped, sometimes even using special moves to go over the fireball. The benefit though is it was much faster than most of the other fireballs. What seemed like a negative at first ended up being one of the best fireballs in Street Fighter 2. You were able to win fireball wars against most characters, and you were able to force your opponent to start to guess on if you're going to throw a high or a low fireball. Because it was so fast, most characters weren't even able to go over the low fireball safely without getting hit by another fireball or an uppercut. This pushed Sagat up the tier list as one of the best characters in the game. In Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Capcom added in super moves, and this changed how players use fireballs forever. When using special moves or hitting your opponent, you gain special meter. Once filled, it allowed an opponent a one-time use of an incredibly powerful move. For example, Ryu's super was a gigantic fireball that was essentially 5 fireballs in one. This would destroy the opponent's fireballs and do a ton of damage if the opponent became predictable. Capcom also added in more moves to destroy fireballs in the neutral game, such as Zangief's green hand special move, giving more options for characters to be able to get in against fireballs. Following up the success of Street Fighter 2, Capcom released Street Fighter Alpha, where some core changes happened. First, players could now block in the air. This allows you to jump at opponents and not get uppercut. Also, the first air fireball was released, not counting the secret character Akuma in Super Turbo, where Akuma and Rolento were able to throw a fireball in the air, fundamentally changing the area the fireball will cover. Instead of only being able to cover a horizontal area on the ground, you can now attack from the air, covering your trajectory and allowing you to be more aggressive on your opponent. In 1999, Capcom released Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. This game completely turned fireballs on their head with the introduction of two new systems, the EX system and the parry system. Special moves can now be powered up with EX, which would use some of your super meter to make the move more powerful. For fireballs, this would allow them to hit twice, be faster, or create more fireballs. With the right timing, you could punish an opponent's fireball with your own EX fireball. With the parry system, opponents had a new option on defense. they could now completely negate fireballs with a parry. This almost completely nullified how traditional fireballs worked. You could no longer sit at range and throw fireballs, as opponents would just parry them and not take any damage, as well as gain meter. These changes made fireballs incredibly weak in Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. They would rarely be used outside of combos and with certain characters. It was almost 10 years later when Capcom came back with a new Street Fighter, Street Fighter 4. Learning from the parry system, this time they designed the focus system. Instead of completely nullifying a fireball, you could absorb a hit. This would temporarily reduce your life, but this life would recover if you didn't get hit soon after. One major upside of absorbing fireballs is that it also increased your new Ultra Meter, which was a comeback mechanic where you got an extremely powerful move once you took enough damage. Unlike Third Strike, EX moves became much more powerful, as the focus attack could only absorb one hit, allowing the second hit of an EX fireball to go through the focus attack absorb. This opened up the mind game tremendously, as players had to decide if it was worth it to attempt to absorb a fireball. Capcom continued to explore new ways for players to get around fireballs as well, by adding armored moves, moves that could absorb a hit from a projectile, and more moves that would go through fireballs. Overall, fireballs were generally strong in Street Fighter 4, but the fireball itself hadn't changed much since Street Fighter 3. In 2016, Capcom decided to change that with the release of Street Fighter 5. While there were the now normalized EX fireballs, armored moves, and supers, Capcom added in the V-skill system. This enabled all characters to gain access to a new move, and for a lot of them, they ended up being anti-fireball moves. For example, M. Bison gained a Reflect, allowing him to not only negate a fireball, but turn it into a fireball of his own. Capcom really tried pushing the capabilities of fireballs and how different they would be with Street Fighter 5. Kage had a fireball that ended up not going very far, but was pretty safe to use even up close, while also gaining an air fireball that stopped his momentum. He also had an ability where he could power up these fireballs by activating his V-trigger, a similar mechanic to Street Fighter 4's Ultra Meter. Ed and Falk added completely new ways to shoot a fireball. Falk could hold a button and release it to shoot a fireball, while Ed held forward and medium punch, followed by another punch to shoot the fireball, reducing the complexity of shooting fireballs by a large amount. Birdie gained 2 projectiles that act very differently than normal fireballs. He could place a banana peel on the ground for players to trip over, and also throw a slow-moving can along the ground for players to trip over. Dhalsim and Lucia could shoot a fireball in an arc, covering an area of the screen that fireballs couldn't before. Overall, Capcom attempted to redefine what the definition of a fireball was for this game. And in 2023, Capcom will be releasing Street Fighter 6. While we don't have a ton of info on all the game mechanics and how they will work, looks like Capcom is keeping up with the tradition of creating more options around fireballs. Parry is making a comeback, but not nearly as strong as when they were in Third Strike. They've already showed off some very interesting projectiles, such as JP's Rift and JP's Command Grab projectile. Overall, it's been exciting to see how the fireball has changed over the decades, and it'll be interesting to see how it continues to evolve with Street Fighter 6.